We're going deep into AI and investing today. And, well, you know how everybody's talking about the S&P 500 and AI stocks? Well, get this. You might be missing out on a huge player in the AI game just because of how the S&P 500 is structured. We're looking at this article from the Motley Fool about Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company,
Okay.
TSMC.
Yeah.
They're making the argument that TSMC is like this under-the-radar AI powerhouse
Right.
that most people just diss, even if they're putting money in the S&P 500.
Right.
So we're going to unpack why TSMC is so important to AI, why they're not in the S&P 500,
Yeah.
and then what all this means for you as an investor or just someone who's curious.
Yeah, there's this misconception that if you're invested in the S&P 500 that you're getting, broad exposure to AI.
Right.
But that's not always the case.
So let's talk about TSMC. Why is this company so important?
So TSMC is important because they manufacture the chips,
Okay.
the very advanced chips that are used to power, all sorts of things, AI related,
Right.
from data centers to the smartphones that we use.
Okay. So they make chips. There's a lot of companies that do that. What's so special about TSMC?
Well, for one, they have a very large market share. They control over 60% of the global market for chip manufacturing.
Wow.
And they're one of only 3 companies in the world that can actually make the most advanced chips, the ones that are needed for companies like Nvidia and their AI technology.
Oh, so even Nvidia, who everybody's talking about with AI, they still need TSMC.
Exactly. Nvidia designs these GPUs, but they need TSMC to actually make them.
Okay. If they're so critical to AI, why aren't they in the S&P 500? It seems strange.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it all comes down to the criteria for being included in the S&P 500.
Oh, okay.
So a company has to be headquartered in the U.S.,
Right.
have most of its assets here, and also they report their profits according to U.S. accounting standards. TSMC doesn't meet those
Got it.
requirements. They're headquartered and operate primarily in Taiwan.
So this isn't really a reflection of, TSMC's worth or potential. It's just a
Right.
structural limitation of the index itself.
Exactly. And that's what makes this an interesting situation for investors because
Right.
there is this potentially massive opportunity that people might be missing out on if they're solely focused
Right.
on the S&P 500.
Okay, so the Motley Fool uses the word brilliant to describe TSMC.
Right.
It can't just be about, making chips for Nvidia, right? What is it that makes them stand out in this AI world?
Yeah, it's not just that they can make chips for Nvidia. It's also that even if another company were to design a chip that was better than Nvidia's for AI, they would still need TSMC to actually manufacture it.
So it's almost like no matter who wins,
Exactly.
the chip design game, TSMC is going to benefit.
Yeah, it's a safer bet on the overall growth of AI,
I see.
regardless of which company wins the chip design war.
Okay. I'm starting to see why the Motley Fool called them a hidden gem. So let's go deeper into TSMC's strengths. What about their technology?
Okay.
What is it about how they make chips that gives them this edge over everyone else? It's like they figured something out that nobody else has,
Yeah, it's not magic or anything, but they do have some serious advantages.
Okay.
One is that they've been totally focused on chip manufacturing for decades, like literally decades.
Right.
Pouring resources into research and development, always pushing the limits of what's possible with chips.
So they've got this deep expertise that they've built up.
Yeah, and their manufacturing processes are incredibly precise and efficient,
Right.
which is super important when you're dealing with components that are measured in nanometers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it's not just about the history, it's also about how they've adapted over time.
Exactly. They haven't just been resting on their laurel. They've been investing in the latest equipment and technology,
Right.
staying ahead of the curve, and this lets them make these chips with incredible performance and density, which is what AI needs,
Right, absolutely. So we talked about the technology side, but is there something about their business strategy that gives them this edge?
Yeah, there is. Early on, TSMC made a really important decision.
Okay.
They decided to focus only on manufacturing
Okay.
and leave the chip design to other companies.
Interesting.
This is called a pure play foundry model, and it's allowed them to work with a ton of different clients.
So they're not competing with their clients. They're like...
Exactly. They're a trusted partner
Sure.
for almost every major chip designer in the world.
So they've built up all this knowledge by working with all these different companies.
Exactly. It's been a super successful strategy. They've built these strong relationships and accumulated a huge amount of knowledge
Right.
about different chip architectures and applications, which makes them even stronger.
Okay, so TSMC is this chip-making powerhouse with amazing technology, a smart business model, and they're all over the globe. What does this mean for their future? What are their future in AI?
Well, their projections look really promising.
Okay.
They're forecasting a 40% annual growth in AI-related sales over the next 5 years, and on top of that, they expect 20% overall growth.
Huge. Those are big numbers. So even though they're not in the S&P 500, they're still going to grow a lot with this whole AI trend.
For sure, AI isn't just some buzzword.
Right.
It's changing everything from healthcare and finance
Yeah.
to transportation, and all of that needs powerful chips,
Right.
which TSMC makes.
So the more AI advances, the more TSMC is going to grow.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's pretty cool. Okay, so TSMC is crucial for AI, and they're going to grow a lot.
Yeah.
But what about investors? The Motley Fool says to buy TSMC,
Right.
along with an S&P 500 ETF, and put like 2% of your portfolio into TSMC
Okay.
to match how much it might be worth if it was actually in the S&P 500. What do you think about that?
That's interesting. It makes sense because the S&P 500 doesn't really show the whole AI opportunity.
Right.
So adding TSMC to your portfolio means you're getting a piece of that AI supply chain.
Okay, I see. But with all this said, isn't the chip industry kind of up and down?
Yeah, that's true. You have to remember that
Okay.
the semiconductor industry has always had these boom and bust cycles because of things like supply and demand technology changes and the global economy.
So it's not just going to go straight up,
Exactly.
even for a company like TSMC.
Right. Even though the long-term outlook for TSMC is really good,
Yeah.
especially with AI investors need to remember that it could be a bumpy ride.
It's not a sure thing, even if it's a great company.
Exactly. And that's where diversification comes in,
Right.
Having that S&P 500 ETF along with TSMC can kind of smooth things out.
Okay.
You get that general market growth, but you're also getting a piece of this specific sector.
Gotcha. It's like you've got your solid team, but you bring in this specialist, you know,
I like that analogy.
to give you the extra edge.
And, this whole conversation about TSMC makes you wonder,
What's that?
how many other opportunities are we missing just because they're not in these big indexes?
That's what I think is so interesting about this. It's like a reminder that you got to dig deeper to find the good stuff.
For sure.
It's not enough to just follow the crowd.
Exactly. You got to understand what's really driving things.
Right.
And be open to companies that maybe nobody's heard of,
Right.
but they're doing really important things.
Yeah, and what we're seeing with TSMC could be happening in other industries too.
Definitely.
Like, what about renewable energy or healthcare? There's got to be hidden gems out there.
Oh, yeah. Tons of them. It's all about being curious and asking questions.
That's what I love about these deep dives.
Me too.
We started with a simple question about why TSMC wasn't in the S&P 500.
Right.
And now we're talking about all this cool stuff.
Yeah, like the future of AI and global supply chains.
Exactly.
That's a good reminder to think differently about where the opportunities are.
So to all our listeners out there,
Yeah.
don't just look at the obvious things. The next big thing might be right in front of you. Just got to keep learning and exploring. You never know what you'll find.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Let's see, I had a 5